been in ministry for about 15 years and have loved the opportunity to mature and grow. It really wasn't until last year that I decided to pursue the idea of church planting full time. This journey all started a year ago when I was talking to a friend of mine who is also a church planter. And he said, for me, I had to stop and really ask God to forgive me for a lack of belief. And I thought, that sounds a lot like my journey. And so I remember walking out one afternoon, just picking up toys, and I said, God, I am sorry for doubting you. I'm sorry for not believing that you could use me. And so if you want to do church planting, if that's what you're calling me to, then I'm all in.
Tesla is south of Canal Fulton and west of Massillon.
It's a small community, and it just has lots of families. It's a more rural community. I think that's part of the reason why we were drawn out this way.
The heart and soul of Community Bible Church is that we would develop sacrificial and authentic followers of Jesus Christ who would intentionally make him known. It's the heartbeat and vision of everything that we're going to do. We want to see not just disciples made, but those who are willing to be sacrificial, authentically genuine in community, and intentional about sharing Christ with those around them.
Well, I'm going to give you one guess who aged better. And it's not me. Church planting's rough, eh? I looked at that and I was like, wow, I was young and didn't know stuff. Anyway, we are glad you are with us. If you are new this morning, my name is Joel, and we are glad that you're with us. I would love to say hi. In case you were wondering who that guy was, that was me about 9 years ago. We were just talking and dreaming about what a church plant in this area would look like. And it took a lot of faith. It took a lot of guts because if you don't know our story, we were interning at Maranatha for a little bit, and then they said, hey, take whoever you want with you. We were like, awesome, that would be awesome. We're going to take people from Maranatha, and they'll join us out in this rural area. It'll be great. And so we had our first meeting at Maranatha. It was our first information meeting, and we had like 4 people show up, and I think they were all related. And so we were like, this is going to be great. And I told Butch, I'm like, this is going to go really, really well. And he said, well, sounds like a parachute drop to me. And so we said, yep, we're going to parachute drop in. We're going to do the hard work, and we're going to start in our living room, and we're going to grow along the way. And you'll hear stories about that throughout this series of what God has done. But man, we are so thankful, and you're going to get to hear a little bit about that journey this morning. As we talk about this Beyond Us campaign, we've arrived. I know it's Palm Sunday, and so we're going to take a little bit of a detour, though, from Palm Sunday, and we're going to speak specifically on this idea of faith this morning. And so if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Jeremiah, actually, of all places. We're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 18 this morning, and we're going to look at this prophet by the name of Jeremiah. But before we do that, I don't know about you, but in marriage, there are 2 different personalities sometimes. One personality who's all gas and all fun, and the other one who is the rational one and the thinker and keeps you employed and keeps the budget in line. And they're not fun. They just are far more logical. And so I'll give you again a guess as far as which one in our house is which. But I've had opportunities in the past to make purchases or invitations to different events. And so typically what happens in that is logic can kick in, and I'll say, well, okay, let me check my calendar. Let's look at our budget. Let's make sure that we have what we need before we pull a trigger on something like that. And there's normally that thing that happens. And so back in 2013, 2012, I decided I wanted a motorcycle, and I wanted one really, really bad. And so I went through the course. We took the course over at Tuslaw High School. I don't know if they still do that anymore. They don't do it anymore. That's too bad. And so I remember taking the course over there, and you could take the course, and once you took the course, if you passed, you got your license, and I did that, did the whole thing, and I was like, you know what? Now all I need is a motorcycle. This is awesome. And so one came for sale. It was a 1981 Yamaha 550, and that was not the original color. And that's not the original dent, but there's a story behind that dent, and it had involve 2 thumbs and an ankle and a church plant, but that's for another day. But I bought this bike, and let me just tell you the story. I went to meet this guy, and he's like, hey, it's a 81, here's the price. And he started it up, and I'm like, hey, it starts, I'll take it. And I was like, and he goes, you don't want to ride it or anything? I'm like, no, I'm just good, I'm good, I'm going to buy it. And I came home, and I didn't rationalize it, I didn't budget it, I didn't think it through. There was no long-term planning. I just heard it, and I was like, yep, that's for me. And so I came home, and I said, I bought a motorcycle. And she said, you bought a what now? And I said, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. We're going to ride it together. And I brought it home, and she's like, I'm going to sit where? And I'm like, well, you're just going to sit on the back. And we've taken this thing through Amish country and things like that. And I'm like, isn't this great? She's like, it's awesome. Like, so much room on this thing. And it was one of those purchases, though, that sounded too good to be true. And honestly, it was a great bike for a lot of years, and it was a lot of fun. And it was a great starter bike because it's just a 550, so, you had to really crank the thing to get on the expressway. But it was just a good around-town bike, And when you get a bike, you do all the dumb things like drive it in 35-degree weather to church for your first ride. And you're like, this is so fun. And it's so cold, and everybody's like, what are you doing? You're like, I got a bike. I'm like, we know, you're freezing. But it was a one-time, immediate purchase, and I said yes so quickly, without any prayer, without any discussion. I said, yep, count me in. It was an invitation that seemed almost like too good to say no to, right? And I think when we talk about what God is doing here at Community, it really does feel like an invitation that sounds too good to say no to, because there's so many stories of what God has done here at Community Bible Church, and what he has done in your lives, and marriages that he's worked through, relationships he's restored, work that you didn't think you'd ever have, a job that you didn't plan on, getting saved, baptisms. Like, there is story after story after story. I mean, for crying out loud, putting a baptismal in a high school and then finding out over the weekend somebody gets baptized in it without us even knowing that they got baptized in it. Hey, we used your baptismal this weekend. Okay. It was after basketball practice, and we just thought it's there. Great. And so there's just those kind of like story after story of what God's inviting us into. And you're going to hear an invitation even to a guy named Jeremiah into a story that seemed too good to be true. And he has a lot of different things that go wrong in his life, but there's a lot of things that go really well. It's an invitation this morning as we look at Beyond Us. Honestly, it's an invitation to something that is not a building. It's an invitation to generations that are going to be beyond us. Generations, our kids, our grandkids, that we are praying, Lord willing, that they would outpace you and I's love for Jesus Christ. That our ceiling would be their dance floor, if I were to put it another way, right? Like the best we could dream about of following Christ, they'd be like, yeah, that was good. I'll take it from here. Like, I would love that in the coming generation, that they would see this as just a launching point into this area to have greater faith, greater stories, that we would hear our kids and our grandkids and those beyond us hearing their stories and being like, wow, we thought we had it good. Look at what God's doing in your life. And so that is really what we're inviting you into this morning. Over the next 5 weeks, I'm inviting you into something of a family meeting. I'm inviting you into something that I fully believe will have long-lasting effect on your life, but also the life of those around us. So if you're visiting this morning, welcome. You've come into a family meeting, and we're going to have some conversations today that you're more than welcome to hear, but we don't expect a whole lot of, full participation unless you want to do that. But this is more for us who call Community home. And so I'm inviting you who call Community home into something that will, again, have purpose, meaning, and life that is beyond you for generations that come beyond us. And so let's look at Jeremiah this morning, and I want to kind of use this as an example as we talk about this faith that goes beyond us. We're going to begin in verse 1 of chapter 18 this morning. Beginning in verse 1, it says, "The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel." Now, just to give you some background of what we're talking about, not many of us go down to the local potter's house today. maybe a different kind of potter, I don't know. But it was not what you think about today of a potter. We got to kind of bring that into 2025, and we'll do that in a second. But let me give you some context this morning. Jeremiah was a prophet in the time of 2 Kings 24 to 25. So if you want to know what was happening around that time, 2 Kings chapter 24 to 25, he was the one who warned the Hebrew people, the Israelites, of future captivity and even the destruction of their capital. He was like, hey, this is not going to go well, and God's actually going to bring in a foreign army, and they're going to take over. And it was not a happy message. A lot of messages he gave to the Israelite people was one of warning of what was to come after. He was not only warned against it, he actually lived through the destruction of the temple and the Babylonian occupation. And as you hear of a campaign and faith beyond us, you're like, this is real motivating, Joel. Destruction, foreign armies coming in, this doesn't sound too uplifting, but it does. Stick with me. Jeremiah was asked to do many personal and even disgusting or gross things to visually demonstrate God's plan to his people. One of the main themes of Jeremiah actually is this idea of adultery, that they had left God for someone else, that they had left their first love, and they had gone and lived with someone else. And Jeremiah was asked to do these warnings again and again and again. This one, however, in chapter 18, was not one of those bad warnings per se. It has plenty to teach us about how God operates and who God is. You see, this isn't about a building. This isn't just about a building campaign and putting a building on land and getting us into one service and planting other things. There's plenty of that to come. This is truly, as Wendy said, this is truly about what God does and who God is. And we're going to ask that he expands our faith during this series, just as he expands other things here as we see in Jeremiah 18. But God told Jeremiah that he would be used to not only uproot and tear down, but also Jeremiah would be used to build and to plant. In Jeremiah chapter 1, just from the beginning of Jeremiah 1, he says, see, this is God speaking to Jeremiah, see, I have appointed you today over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to build and to plant. That was his call. You're not only going to bring justice and you're not only going to cause these people to turn from their sin, you're also going to build and to plant, and it's going to be a dual kind of ministry. And again, in this particular instance, he's asked to go to the potter's house. And so again, we need some context. We know now who Jeremiah is, but what does it mean that he goes to the potter's house? Imagine, this is going to sound weird. Stick with me. Imagine a life with no containers, like zero, like nothing to put something in, no cups, Tupperware, nothing. This was the day and age where there was this new thing called pottery and jars that you actually could store grain in, and you didn't have to go and just go to the creek and kind of just lap it up and live, hand to mouth, and you could actually store things in these things called jars. And this was kind of new technology in the day of Jeremiah. So I know we're going way back in history, but this was life-altering. This was a significant moment to have pottery. The invention of pottery set off a revolution. Before pottery, there were only wandering tribes following herds of animals and going from one food supply to another food supply. Forced here by drought or by famine, they would basically have to go wherever the food or the water sources were. You didn't just kind of say, I want a vacation house in Florida. You wanted to actually live where animals and food were. You didn't get that luxury of having, to live in a suburb or things like that. You had to go wherever the water source was. And so the invention of pottery made it possible to store and to carry these things and no longer be hand-to-mouth existence, but you could actually go day-to-day survival through it. Then it was possible to stay in a place for a while because grain could be stored for next winter's meal and water carried and cooking could be done and merchandise transported. The invention of pottery signaled a revolution, and the revolution was what we called the civilization, it was the Neolithic age. And this Neolithic age came with it all this new technology called pottery, to which today we just put pottery up because it looks pretty and we put flowers in it. But back then, this was mind-blowing. This was revolutionary. Try to imagine again how life would change if you had no containers to store anything. No pots, no pans, no bowls, no dishes, no buckets, no jugs, No cans, barrels, cardboard boxes, brown paper bags, no grain silos, no oil storage tanks. Life would be reduced to only the things we could manage every single day. Can you imagine, even just to put it in perspective, you roll through McDonald's and they're like, what can we get you? You're like, I'll cheeseburger and fries. And they throw you a cheeseburger and they hand you a hot thing of fries. And you're like, okay. And you're trying to drive and the whole thing, right? Remember this was a thing in youth ministry days called coning. You remember coning? It was a thing, they did a practical joke. Whenever they handed somebody a cone, they would grab the ice cream instead of the cone and it would fall and they'd laugh and leave. It was very cruel. I don't suggest it. But it was a whole thing. And I'm like, guys, let's not do that. But imagine like no way of handling anything. Everything's hand to mouth. And this was where Jeremiah finds himself. Now, pottery was not only useful, it was also, it was designed on purpose. We'll get to that in a second. But he says, go to the potter's house. And when he says go to the potter's house, it would be similar to saying, hey, go to the local gas station or go to the local Walmart. Like it was just a staple of the area. Everybody knew there was a potter's house. There was one in every village, one in every town, because everybody needed a jar. And so he goes to a very common place, to a common area, and he is asked to go and speak to this guy who's at the pottery wheel. He's actually just going to observe. And again, the thing with pottery is it's not just useful, but it had design and flair of the local potter who was in the town. And so each potter had their own signature kind of jar that they would make, or this kind of design, or they kind of just made it more artistic, or if you took it home, you would make it your own. And so it was not only useful, it was also very practical, and it was very beautiful at the same time. It was function and form. And so to give you an example, this is Doug the mug, and my daughter has Doug the pug. And when she was little, we went over to Glazed and Amused. Have you been out that way? And she made a pug, and I made a mug. And And so Doug the mug and Doug the pug. And if you were to look at this, you would see that I am very skilled in painting. Actually, what you would see is this thing's a hot mess. Paint went everywhere. Things were kind of inside and outside. But the thing is, when it was handed to me, it was just a container, right? It was just a mug. And I could have taken it home with no imagination and said, mug, right? Like useful, practical. Let's not do anything to it. But the whole part of going to that store and spending the money there is that you get to paint it, make it your own. And so I don't know why I chose green and orange inside. I don't know if you can see orange inside. And a gray top, but that was the day, and that was what I was feeling. And it's a reminder of just that date night and things like that. But it's also a reminder that what is practical was also personal. And this mug has a story to it, right? It's personal to me. Even on the bottom, I'm not going to turn it over because there's water in it, but it actually has the date and things like that we did this, right? That was my date night with her. And so what was also functional had beauty to it. And so he's at the potter's house, he's at the potter's wheel, and we pick up in verse 4. And the vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel as it seemed good to the potter to do. That's interesting. So he sees this, the potter makes a mistake, and it's a pretty vital mistake, and he could have actually just tossed it out and just started over, but he instead takes what he messed up and he starts to rework it into another vessel as it seemed good. This is important. As it seemed good to the potter to do. Not the customer, not Jeremiah to do, but what seemed good to the potter to do. I love this. Instead of throwing it out, he reworks it for another purpose. He says, this is still valuable. I can still make something here. And what I'm seeing in this story specifically, and you're going to hear in other scripture as we walk through today, is that God is the same way with you and I, where he takes us and our journey with him, and he creates us. And we are designed for function, and we are also designed in beauty. You are not just a human being. You are by design loved and cared for by Creator God. And he takes our journey of faith, like this mug, and like this container, he starts to rework our journey sometimes. And what often feels to us in our spiritual life with Jesus like failures, or like things God could never use, or things that we should be shunned for or run away from. God says, I'm going to, as a good potter does, I'm going to take your story, I'm going to rework it into something beautiful. The problem is we often get the two roles reversed, do we not? We assume that we are the potter and that he is somehow the clay, but the reality is that it's not true. The reality is God is the potter and we are the clay, and God says, I'm going to design your life the way that I feel is best. We're going to see that in a second. It's a story of faith and trust. That just as that small container was being worked, God sees it and he says, I'm going to expand it. I'm going to make it grow. I'm going to take your faith, perhaps, and I'm going to grow it. What was started in faith at Community Bible Church, we're going to continue to grow in our faith in a daily life. I love this because it's not just pottery. It's the symbol for us of our walk in Jesus Christ, and it's saying it's an everyday kind of faith. Pottery, the jugs were normal, they were everyday kind of things, but there was a beauty to it because God was in the design. And we could look at our day-to-day life and we can get bogged down, or we can look at our day-to-day faith and say, God, would you expand it? Would you grow it? Would you make it something better? In Mark chapter 9, Jesus has a story with an unknown father who has a child who is born with this propensity to throw himself into a fire. And they're always having to watch and make sure that he doesn't harm himself. And there's something wrong mentally that this child keeps doing this again and again and again. And it says in Mark chapter 9, 22 to 24, but it often casts him into the fire and into water to destroy him. And as he's telling the story, he sees Jesus, and Jesus walks onto the scene, and he talks to Jesus, and he says to Jesus this. He says, but if you, Jesus, can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Day-to-day life is miserable for this man. Day-to-day life is stressful. Day-to-day life is I'm trying to follow God, and every single step of the way we're getting sidetracked every 5 minutes by our kid who's harming himself. Could you please have compassion and help us? And Jesus said to him, I love this, if you can. We don't know if this is a question mark or if this is an exclamation point or if this is both, but Jesus is looking at him in the eye and he says, what do you mean if I can? What do you mean if I'm able to? He says to him, all things are possible for the one who believes. In other words, anything is possible for the faith that is expanded, that trusts in me and me alone. And I love this man's response, and I think this is such a beautiful and humble response of this father, and I believe it would probably be the same response of those in Jeremiah's day. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said this, I believe, help my unbelief. Isn't that so good? I love his honesty. I believe. I know who you are. But Jesus, can I just be honest? Day to day is rough. Every day is a struggle with our son. We are trying our best, but we are trying to just keep him alive. And you don't understand the day-to-day pressure that we feel, the ridicule we get from our neighbors, the fact that we probably should have just avoided this and got him out of the house long ago. But God, I believe, but man, you need to help my unbelief. And the potter knows the clay, does he not? And the potter knows us. And so when we come to Jesus, we can say, Jesus, would you increase my faith? Jesus, I believe you can do all things, but I don't sometimes believe you can do all things, right? I know you can do it in their life, but I don't know if you can do it in my life. And faith is that journey that God is growing us into. And I love that Jeremiah, the verses in Jeremiah pick up this way. It reminds us of who God is this morning. Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel. This is verse 6 of chapter 18. Can I not do with you as this potter has done, declares the Lord. Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. Oh, what an image. I love it. He says, just as that potter cared and created and made and formed and walked away from that jug was like, that's my jug. Like, I don't know if we'd have to, but you know what I mean? Like, he walked away, he's like, that, I made that. I did that. You ever have a project you walk away from, you're like, I nailed that. Like, that was Awesome. You show it to somebody and they're like, eh. You're like, no, you don't understand. This was hours of work. This was awesome. Like, it's Doug the Mug, for crying out loud. Like, have you seen my work? It's gorgeous, right? And so we walk away and we think, that's mine. He says the same is true of the Lord and us. He says, I look at my creation and I look at it and I say, look at this. I love it, and I could do as I wish with it. Even if others are on the outside of you and I going, that's okay. God instead looks and says, I am truly the potter and you are the clay. I love this. Verse 7. If at any time I declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will pluck up and break down and destroy it, and if that nation concerning which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I intended to do to it. And if at any time I declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will build and plant it, and if it does evil in my sight, not listening to my voice, then I will relent of the good that I intended to do to it. You see, he says, I can do as I wish because it's mine. And if I want to use Babylon to take over, I'm going to do that. If Israel would turn to me and actually repent, I'll stop that army in a second. You see, we forget that God is the one who controls all things. We are not in control of this campaign. We are not in control of what God does or how fast he moves. We are simply the vessels to which God the potter is making us into, individually and corporately as a church. Community Bible Church is in the hands of the one who is the creator. I love that. Isaiah 64, verse 8 says it this way. Yet, Lord, you are our Father, we are the clay, and you are the potter. We are all the work of your hands and not our own. Romans 9 talks about this as well. The big point this morning is simply this. Faith is everyday beauty for generations that are to come beyond us. Faith is that everyday beauty. It's that everyday trust that God will sovereignly work in your life and in our lives together. Faith is everyday beauty. To put it another way, it is the beautiful monogamy of every single day being with our Heavenly Father. When I say monogamy, it's that thing of like you are tied to your spouse for life, right? We've talked about that in our house a lot. We have a joke around our house like, sorry, you signed the deed. Like you can't get out of this. You're with me forever. And even when you get to eternity, I'm still going to be bugging you. So I don't know what to tell you. And so we've always just kind of joked around like that's it for life. And we could just be honest, right? For those couples in the room that have been married for a long time, like, could we just say that there are days in our marriage that are a grind? They feel like just another Tuesday, right? They feel like just another Thursday. To all the couples that are getting engaged, we got some engaged couples in the room. They're like, you're killing this, man. This is great. I'm really wanting to get married right now. But I promise, it's amazing. But there are days where it's just days. But it's a beautiful monogamy, right? It's a beautiful day-to-day routine that even in our silence and even in days that are hard, I wouldn't trade it. Because it's the beautiful commitment to my wife. It's a beautiful commitment to her, to me. And yeah, there are peaks and valleys, but at the same time, the same is true in our faith. Like, faith is everyday beauty. And there are seasons where it's awesome and we're killing it. And there are seasons where God is ripping things out of us and it's difficult. But faith is growing nonetheless. Eugene Peterson, in his book, Running with Horses, says it this way. For faith is not a leap out of every day, but a plunge into its depths. Only Eugene Peterson writes this way. Faith is not a leap out of every single day monotony. It's actually plunging into the depths of an average Tuesday and saying, God, what do you want to do today? God, what are we after today? God, what are we working on today? And I know many of us, like when we get up in the morning, we're not, that excited, right? We're hitting the snooze times 5, making it to work, barely getting our coffee in, and we're like, I made it, right? But what if there was that opportunity during the day to say, God, what are we into today? What are we working on today? How can I be part of what you're making me into? I love that the same word in Hebrew that the potter uses when he says shape is actually the same word for the word potter. So shaping and the potter go hand in hand in Hebrew. And just as the potter was shaping the clay, so God is shaping Jeremiah, he's shaping us, and he's shaping you and I today. Here's the thing. You and I, we all have a story of faith, right? We said in My Circle training last year, think of that person that brought you to Jesus. Just for a minute, just be practically with me. Think for a minute of that person that led you to Jesus Christ. That person that took the risk to speak Christ into your life. Now think of the other person who spent years with you, or maybe even weeks, months, I don't know, with you, sharing the depths of the Bible with you. They walked with you through hard seasons. They ministered to you. Those kind of people in our life are stories of your faith. It's the stories of our faith. As a community Bible church, we have stories where God grew us and matured us. Our faith is constantly being shaped every day, and our trust in Jesus is constantly being built day by day. My prayer is that your faith is increasing and not decreasing. My prayer is that your faith isn't just stagnant and steady and doing whatever you can do, but it's trusting God in the everyday of what He is able to do, that He would increase our faith. Not only do you have a story, we as a church have a story, and there are those in this room who have gone ahead of some of you in the room today. What I mean by that is there are some in this room that started with us at the very beginning that took leaps of faith to say, we're going to stick with this guy who's really young looking and not any gray hair, and we're going to walk him and watch him get really old and really gray. We're going to watch that happen. They stepped into a story at the beginning, and I want to share pieces of this with you. And so some of you are here and stepped into faith when we were in a living room like this, and that is still our living room today, but that is us in the room as we dreamed, thought, planted about Community Bible Church. Just a handful of us sitting around a room, praying, dreaming about what Community Bible Church could be. And so some of you stepped in early and said, yeah, I want to be part of this. I want to see what God does in this area. And then others of you stepped into faith when we started worshiping in a living room in Kindy's house. And so there's a really grainy video of Sunday morning service. Since last Sunday morning, we started with a handful of us with a guitar and a TV and food. And maybe some of you are like, what happened to the food? Maybe we should revisit those days. Thank you, all right? We'll talk about the budget later. And so, those stories, like, they jumped in early, and they're part of that mission, that purpose of starting even in the living room. And then some of us stepped into faith. We started meeting in the elementary school. And how many remember the fun benches that we got to sit on? Yes, these were so comfortable. And these were awesome because I just got to share this. These benches were converted into tables during the week, and so they just folded up and you could make them into tables. But what they forgot to tell us was that these were elementary age tables. So everybody that sat down on one of these benches sat with good intentions that there'd be like something to catch them. And there was, but something to catch you was always 2 or 3 inches below what you thought it would be. And so every time somebody came in, they're like, I'm going to sit down. And because it was an elementary age, bench, and their knees were up to here. And like when we said we were going to get rid of the benches, there was much rejoicing in heaven because of it, because these things were difficult to move, but they were what we had, and it worked. And so we started in an elementary school and took steps of faith as we moved forward. We moved from the elementary school to the high school, and we had now blue plastic chairs, and everybody's like, yes, plastic chairs that are really heavy and hard to move and set up and tear down every single week, and we trailer in and trailer out, and the school was generous to us, and they allowed us to put TVs up and that whole thing, and we're able to work with them until eventually we outgrew that space as well. And then we moved into this space, in this room, and we said, hey, this building is going to be a stepping stone for us. We're going to do what we need to do. And as we walked in faith to come into this place, we bought it in the end of 2019, fun story, and at the end of 2019, we renovated the basement, we got it all ready. We're like, this is going to be awesome. 2020 is going to be our year. And in 2020, like, we were busting out the seams in January, February, and then all of a sudden this small little thing called COVID came up, and we're like, well, that was great, God. But here's what God did. If we were still in the high school, we wouldn't have been able to meet anywhere. Isn't it cool of God's faithfulness that he gave us a building as small as it was to give us a place to gather? Because at that point, they were kicking everybody out. They were washing down walls. They were like, there is no way you're stepping foot in this high school or elementary school. And God supplied what we needed in 2019 into 2020. And just as he's done those things, he's continued to grow us in our faith. I'm going to share more of that as we continue in this series. But there are those in this room that walked ahead of you in faith so that you in this room today could walk ahead in faith for future generations beyond you. So there's going to be stories 3 years from now, 5 years from now, I don't know. There's going to be stories of, hey, remember when we were in this really crammed building? Remember when we used every spot possible and we threw our staff into every nook and cranny and called it an office? Do you remember when we moved everything around and we made it work because that's what God gave us? Do you remember how God did that? And even as we hoped and dreamed that we would be able to build and even launch other rural churches out from us, which is a huge dream we're going to share more about, but wouldn't it be great if we here today were part of that story that said, I was there and part of the next generation that is going beyond us? And so a couple of things to communicate in the Beyond Us thing is that there will be themes per week as we journey through this. There will be more kind of family meeting conversations. This will be an ask for 25 months, and we're going to hear more about that at Vision Nights and things like that, so I won't get into all the numbers and details this morning. You're going to get things in the mail this week that are going to explain all of the details and all that stuff. You'll get that in the mail this week. If you would like that, please, let us know. We'll get you an address. You can send you one of those brochures you're going to see here coming this week. We are praying in faith that God will give us what we need as we look towards this huge, huge campaign. We've done smaller campaigns in the past, but nothing like this. And so Vision Nights, church-wide fasting and prayer campaigns. You're going to see 21 days of prayer. You're going to see all these things are going to start to come out as we start this journey together. But as we do this, the biggest thing is not just about a building. The biggest thing is we are trusting God for what only He can do, because we want the next generation to have a story of faith. We're asking, God, I believe, would you help my unbelief? Because as we've prayed it in the past, and as we've continued to pray it as elders, God has continually, every step of the way, shown us He is good, He is faithful. There is nothing that is beyond His power to do this. We want generations to have a story of faith. I love that as we wrap up this morning, I want to give you one other quote from Jeremiah, and this has become like my favorite verse of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was asked what kind of life to expect in this whole being a prophet thing. And I love that he says in Jeremiah 12, verse 5, this is kind of the theme for me as I think through this series and as I think through what God's going to do for us. Jeremiah 12:5, he says, if you have raced with men on foot and they have wearied you, how will you compete with horses? And if in a safe land you are so trusting, what will you do in the thicket of Jordan? In other words, if this is hard, what are you going to do when I ask for even bigger things? If you think this is difficult, what are you going to do when we really start training, right? Joby Martin says, God, would you not lighten my load, but would you expand the width and the breadth and the strength of my shoulders for what's to come? That's what we want in our faith. If you think this is hard, wait till I ask you to do the next one and the next one and the next one. Because what God does is He continues to grow our faith. If you've raced with horses on, if you've raced with men on foot and they've wearied you, how on earth are you going to do it when I start bringing horses into the race? He's like, get ready. This is going to get tough. This is going to get good. This is going to get amazing. And at the end, you're going to walk away and you're like, oh my goodness, look at what God did. Look at how He moved in this time. And look at we were able to grow in our faith because of it. Father, would you not lighten our burdens, but instead would you broaden our shoulders to carry the weight of it? Matthew 16:18 tells us the familiar thing of Peter's confession that the church would be built upon the confession of Jesus Christ as the only one who leads His church. And as He says that I, Jesus, will build my church, He says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I love this because we often think of the gates of hell as kind of like this offensive thing that's prevailing against us, but gates don't move. Gates don't prevail. They're not an offensive weapon. Gates are defensive weapons. Does that make sense? They're not going to move. They're not going to have swords in their hands. They are static and they don't move. He says the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Prevail against what? Against the church. In other words, when the church gets active and the church gets moving and the church starts following in faith, that the gates of hell can't stand the weight and the strength of God's people. And my call and my request as we think of building this church is not just building a church, but that we would run into the darkness and the darkness would crumble at the force of Jesus Christ running at it. That you, God's people, would run with strength and with force, and that the gates of hell would crumble before us as we run into the darkness to rescue those who are lost in the middle of darkness. This community looks really pretty. It looks like they have it all together. A lot of good families. But what I notice is when you start to scratch below the surface, everybody's got a story. And everybody's stories is just as jacked up as yours. And everybody in this area looks good, but they are living in darkness, and the enemy loves that because they don't even know they're living in darkness. And so our call as the church is to run at the gates of hell with the power of Jesus Christ and rip people out of the darkness. And just keep grabbing them from the fire and saying, another one's gone. God, we got him. We're good. My friend, my circle, the people I'm going after, that's who this is for. We end this morning in Psalm 108. I'm going to bring the worship team up as we close and as we declare this together this morning. But I want to leave you with one other verse this morning. It's from Psalm 108, and I want to read it from the Message this morning because it speaks so well of it. It says, I'm ready, God. So ready from head to toe, ready to sing, ready to raise a God song. Wake, soul, wake. We don't have lutes anymore. Maybe we should get one of those for the band. He says, wake up, you sleepy head son. This is what he says in this. He goes, I'm going to wake the sun up because he's too slow. Isn't that a great image? Like, we're so ready to go after people and after the things that God has for us. We're like, come on, son, let's go. I'm going to wake the sun up with my energy, with my enthusiasm for what God can do. And the sun's like, all right, I'm coming, right? That we would be people, honestly, that would just go after those in darkness. Again, this is not a building campaign. It is and it isn't, right? We're going to ask you for funds. We're going to ask you to give generously, sacrificially, more than you ever have in the past. We're going to be unapologetic about that. But this is not about walls. This is about a place that we could reach future generations from, that we could, Lord willing, running with horses level, we could see churches planted from Community Bible Church in other rural areas. Smaller, rural area churches that could be part of our story if we follow after him.